It takes.
I love you. And frankly, I'm with
you. No, they cleaned the desk off themselves. I was taking the slides out.
I need, it's Maurice Levi and the name of the book. Slowth, good. And Florence Kemp is serving a 90-day jail sentence at the moment in the most unusual manner. And name? Heather Strachan. Name of organization again? Everybody in the bloody world's a single mother.
1 minute. Jack, your mic. Jack, your mic. Your mic.
I don't need a mic. I'm just going to shout.
Good.
Windex does more than windows?
More than just windows shine with Windex spray. More than just counters gleam the Windex way. More than just taps and stoves and chrome. Windex all around your home. Not just glass, but so much more.
Windex with powerful ammonia D for windows and so much
More.
Webster is next on BCTV.
Good morning. It's trite but true to say that the world was stunned by the attempted assassination yesterday of the American President Reagan. To us, it seems quite abominable and horrifying. But the Americans must be given some credit for the fact that while they could do like de Gaulle did and surround their president with a total armed guard with machine guns and body packs and bulletproof vests, the Americans are sensitive enough to realize that democracy must look like democracy. And presidents of all people deliberately, it would seem to me, take these chances of being shot by whatever cook happens to be around. The good news, of course, is that our friend Reagan, whether you like him or lump him, has survived in the most incredible manner the attack on him in Washington, D.C. yesterday. And just to bring you up to date, 10 seconds from now, we're going to give you a summary of the bulletin that was issued in Washington this morning by a man who is now a world figure overnight, Dr. Dennis O'Leary.
Blood pressure has been running about 130 over 80, which is totally normal. His pulse rate's about 70. You and I would do well to have such a good pulse rate. Temperature's normal.
And Brady, the press secretary, is still alive, has some damage to the right cortex of his brain, which is not his motor side, some minor damage to the left cortex, and they are encouraged by the fact that he's still alive and making some progress this morning. From the sublime to the ridiculous, but still about doctors in this country and about balance billing or extra billing, Steve Wyatt has a special report for you, and I can tell you, I think, what the government is going to do today after the release this morning at 7:30 of the doctors' votes, which are overwhelmingly to begin under the contract tomorrow, balance billing as they call it, and to reject by 94% the government's 15% offer of a wage increase. To keep you intrigued this morning, Marie Peacock, who is the director of the Lakeside Correctional Center, that's Ocala to you and me, is going to answer my questions about what changes have been made since the well-publicized inquiry into the suicide death of a 32-year-old Vancouver woman who hanged herself in solitary confinement last November 1980. I have an economist in the studio this morning called Maurice Levi, very bright guy, who's going to tell you how to beat everything. He's written a book called Slowth. I don't quite know what it means, but he'll tell us. And then again, on the happier side of the news, you're going to meet a woman called Florence Kemp, who is presently doing 90 days in the bucket for welfare fraud. But she's doing it in a most unusual manner. It will take her 90 weeks to do the 90 days, a day a week. And with her is Heather Strachan, Single Mothers United for Change. The whole world, it seems to me, today is now full of single mothers. But first, for the latest on the extra billing, balance billing by the doctors, and what the government will do about it this very day after the break. Throughout the program, as necessary, we'll bring you up to date on all the developments in Washington, D.C. Let's start this morning, however, with a statement by the BC Medical Association at 7:30 a.m. precisely on what happens now.
Jack, I'm at the headquarters of the BC Medical Association in Vancouver, where it's all been made official. Unless the government today enters legislation to make it illegal, by tomorrow morning we'll all be paying more because the doctors will be allowed to balance bill. The long-awaited results were released this morning from that vote that was taken this week, and Jim Gilmore is here with me, the Director of Communications, to give us the details.
Steve, the 94% of the doctors voted to reject the government offer, and that's a very high vote and certainly very encouraging for our president, Dr. Mandeville.
90% of your doctors say no to 15.2%.
94%, and another 86% of them said that they would balance bill as of April 1st at their discretion.
They want to balance bill.
Yes.
Now, what happens if the government does introduce legislation today?
Well, our president, Dr. Mandeville, has said that doctors naturally are law-abiding people, and if that legislation comes through banning balance billing, doctors would certainly obey the law. However, we would be surprised because we have a legal agreement with the government which permits balance billing as of April 1st.
In effect, what balance billing is for our doctors is their way of striking, isn't it?
Yes, the doctors won't strike, and this was put into our contract with the government as a safety valve for doctors in lieu of a strike.
Now, what does this mean? If I am in a position where I have to go to an emergency ward tomorrow morning, first thing tomorrow morning, am I going to have to present a Charge X card to get treatment?
No, of course not. Nobody will be turned away for if you don't have a Charge X card.
But the balance billing is in effect?
As of April 1st. We're still conducting meetings around the province right now to inform office staffs and so on how to introduce it to practices, and that tour isn't finished until I think April the 7th, so it'll be going in at various times.
And if the legislation comes through, you will respect the law. Now, there are several hundred doctors in this province who are not members of the BC Medical Association.
That's right.
Do you have a reading on their feelings?
Well, we sent a letter to each of them asking for their financial support, and we were overwhelmed with financial support from these doctors. We also picked up quite a few new members. We asked them for $50, and I think a couple of hundred doctors responded with checks varying up to $500 in one case.
Now, Dr. Alex Mandeville is in Victoria this morning.
Yes.
How do you read the situation now? Do you suspect or expect that legislation to go through?
It's a heavy-duty situation right now, Steve. We don't know. We don't know what to expect. All we know is that we have a legal agreement with the government, which balance billing is nothing new to this government. It's you go to you mentioned emergency departments, you get balance billed there, and you have for quite a long time. So for the government perhaps to say that it's against their policy, I really don't quite understand where they're coming from on that.
Now, the doctors want 40%, is that right?
About 41%.
41%. Now, is there an agreement in your contract with the government, so to speak, that balance billing does not take effect if they pay 90%?
That's true. If their offer had reached 90% of our guide, then there's no balance billing.
But they're well behind that right now.
Well behind it.
Thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you.
And I can tell you right now, as of 9:08, that the Minister of Health, Nielsen, will introduce legislation to ban balance billing in the House in Victoria this afternoon. But I want you to see what Premier Bennett said to me yesterday, for a reason.
Now that was always been the social credit policy, that there would be no extra billing. In 1974, with the new contract with the doctors, Dennis Koch had a clause in there for the first time that would allow them to balance bill. And I want to say that's not our policy, although that's the contract that still exists. And no, we're not going to, it is not the policy of our government to allow balanced billing.
After the program yesterday, the Premier was good enough to phone me, having remembered what he said about Dennis Koch introducing balance billing in 1974, which was my recollection, and I believe also the recollection of Alex Mandeville. But in fact, the right to balance bill in certain circumstances was introduced by the social credit government in 1971. But the Premier's statement yesterday and the action by the Minister of Health in the House later today makes it perfectly clear that this government, certainly from here on in and from this time on, does not support, advocate, nor will it allow balance billing, extra billing, call it what you may, by the doctors. This does create a bit of a crisis for the medical profession. They have rejected the 15.2 or 15.3 overall increase. They want 41%. The balance billing might have been $5 or $6 to you on your charge X or in cash for a simple matter and a simple call. But of course, if you go through the details of the fee schedule now set up by the BC Medical Association, you would find that in more complicated procedures, that balance billing might cost you several hundreds of dollars for heavier treatment at the hands of the medical profession. However, you can be assured, one, that there won't be any extra balance billing, two, that the government will introduce legislation, and three, it's now up to the government, especially Nielsen and the Treasury Board, to decide what to do. They may well be forced into a position whereby when they bring in the legislation this afternoon to ban the extra billing, that they may also have to bring in arbitration, perhaps binding on both parties, not merely on the doctors, to look again at the inflation, the increase, and where, if any, the doctors have suffered. So we'll watch for the legislation in the House this afternoon. But something obviously must be done other than straightforward meetings to bring a solution to the doctors' crisis, especially when they tell us they've got a 94% rejection of the deal and an 80% approval of balance billing. But that's the score on extra billing as it stands right now. Legislation in the House this afternoon. And I'll be back to have a look in some detail at what's happening in Lakeside Correctional Center. Don't forget, we'll keep you up to date on everything that happens in Washington with Marie Peacock, the director. Well, let's call it Ocala and be done with it. Women's prison after the break. On the face of it, the death of a 32-year-old prisoner, a Vancouver woman who was actually awaiting trial, by the name of Maureen Shelley Richard, in Ocala prison. She hanged herself last November 16th, is really a shocker. A coroner's inquest was held and the jury made 1, 2, 3, 4, what might well be major recommendations. And I asked Marie Peacock, who's the director of the Lakeside Correctional Center, to come and tell me, one, the circumstances of the death as she knows it, and two, is the public entitled to think that a woman awaiting trial in Ocala can be so neglected and in such a state that she's almost bound out? She may well commit suicide.
Well, there wouldn't be the problem of her being neglected. That just wouldn't be possible.
But this woman died in solitary confinement.
No, she did not die in solitary confinement. She died in the unit in which she was living.
She did not die, as it says here and says everywhere, in solitary confinement.
No, she did not die in solitary confinement.
She died in a room by herself?
That's right. She had a single room, and that's where she died.
Was she without supervision during a night or for some length of time which gave her the opportunity to work herself into a state and kill herself?
No, she was not without supervision. In that particular unit, there are 2 staff, and they're observing the inmates at all times. She wasn't unobserved for more than 5 or 10 minutes.
But when they found her, she was beyond resuscitation?
That's right.
When you find somebody like that, though, do you have any skilled people or trained facilities for attempting resuscitation?
Well, our staff are all trained for resuscitation initially when they take their training, and we do have a nurse that is on duty for 16 hours a day. That particular afternoon we didn't have our own nurse. However, there was a nurse at the men's hospital. The men's hospital is as close to our unit as the Doukhobor unit, which is our own unit.
And how quickly did the nurse get to her?
The nurse was up, I believe it was about 7 or 8 minutes, but in the meantime the staff that were on duty were giving her artificial respiration.
But she was gone?
Yes.
Do you feel, I know you feel badly about it, but can you tell me before I go to recommendations what you need, if it is possible at all, to prevent a deliberate suicide in a setting such as a prison?
Well, I think if it's a deliberate suicide, there's very little that can be done. Suicides are committed everywhere. However, there are very few committed in the women's prison.
How many have you had?
I think there's been 4 in the history of the prison. That doesn't make it any less traumatic or any less undesirable. However, we have only had 4 in all the history of the prison.
Which is how long?
Oh, that particular prison, I would say 40 to 50 years.
40 to 50 years, you've had 4. Now, when this woman was awaiting trial,
yes.
What kind of charge, remember?
She was awaiting trial for, I think they were quite violent charges. I don't remember them specifically, but they were possession of a dangerous weapon, failing to appear for a hearing.
And she didn't get bail for some obvious and cogent reason, I presume.
That's right.
So she'd been in for what, a couple of weeks?
She'd been in, she was admitted, I believe, on October 30th.
Had you had much trouble prior to that, prior to the tragic event, with the woman's behavior?
Yes, she was a behavior problem. There was no question about it. I assumed, at least, or my staff and I assumed that she was suffering from DTs. So she was hallucinating, she had bugs crawling, she heard voices, etc. So as a result of that, we put her into an area where she could be quiet and receive a lot of attention. However, she continued to be very ill, not the hallucinating as much, but she was very sick to her stomach. So we had the medical people examine her, and she was sent to the Vancouver General Hospital. She was in the hospital for 5 days. She was quite a serious behavior problem to the Vancouver General Hospital, and out of danger as far as the stomach ailment went. So then she was returned to our center. I believe it was either the Thursday or the Friday evening, and she committed suicide on the Sunday.
Do you have a doctor on staff there?
There are doctors on staff to the Ocala district, which is the men's and women's unit.
Would she see a doctor every day she was in the hospital?
Oh, she would have seen the hospital doctor every day, yes.
Every day. But what bothers me, Marie Peacock, why is it a person who is so upset, perhaps you can't answer this question, for whatever reason, whether it's alcoholism, the DTs, or whatnot, should they not be in a mental institution instead of being in a prison, which is not there to cope with people who may well become, as this woman did, unbalanced?
There are people who should not be in prison because of their mental problems. However, we have to, first of all, wait for the medical people to decide that. It's not our decision. We're not medical people. And then once the decision is made and the committal papers are written out, we still have to wait for an order in council, which could take up to 6 weeks.
So even if you had somebody who was really round the bend, and they'd been sent there by the courts to await trial,
yes,
until you go through all the medical procedures and red tape, you're stuck.
That's right, we are.
Let's go through the recommendations, specifically the recommendations made to the jury. Prisoners suffering from emotional problems or alcohol or drug withdrawal should be placed in a proper treatment facility and not, as with Richard, in the solitary confinement unit. Give me that again. Was she downstairs in the place I was in 79, 80?
Yes, she was down there, but that's what we often use that area for constant, uninterrupted surveillance.
With staff down there?
That's right.
But no, she was not in a solitary confinement unit?
No, she was not.
Not one of these places with the bars on them?
Yes, it has bars on the door, but we had her there because it was the only quiet area we could keep her and observe her constantly.
Normal meals?
Yes, normal meals.
Staff should get formal suicide prevention and first aid training instead of relying on the on-the-job practice.
Well, staff do have a very elementary training in abnormal behavior. They do not have something specific to suicides. We'll have to investigate to find out what that training would be.
Procedures be established so that the staff can communicate with each other about the mental condition of prisoners and hospital records made available. That's an odd one, but would anybody not know that this woman was in a mental state?
No, there wouldn't be anyone that would not know that. They would observe for themselves. And of course, as far as medical records, there is some medical confidentiality. However, when it comes to the behavior of the inmate, that is not kept confidential.
A couple of specific criticism. One witness at the inquest, if this is correct from the report, is that a native court worker was turned away from Ocala twice. This woman was a BC Indian woman?
Yes.
Being told by one of your people that native court workers were unreliable and caused confusion. Are you aware of that at all?
To the best of my knowledge, an investigation that did not occur. We have never turned away a native court worker.
Have you had trouble with native court workers?
Only in the sense that they're not consistent with coming into the institution. Otherwise, we haven't any problem with
But
them.
a native court worker can come in same as any other court worker
yes,
can
they
come in.
certainly can.
Only during specific hours?
That's right.
I have a couple of other points I want to tackle Marie Peacock about after the break. Marie Peacock has been director of Lakeside Correctional Center, one of the most unenvied jobs, I think, in the prison corrections system. Is it dressed up at all since I was there? Is it, you know, it's such a...
Well, the interior...
I was going to say grungy, but then prisons are always grungy,
yes,
no
yes.
matter how you dress them up.
That's right. The interior of it, however, is been completely repainted and is, I would say, impeccably clean.
How many prisoners?
In the low 50s.
How many? Oh, you're down a bit from
Yes.
the time I was out there.
Yes.
How many staff?
69.
Okay, and you have to cover 24 hours a day?
That's right.
7 days a week. Any lifers?
The lifers would only be with us until their transfer was completed.
I remember you had one lifer there who was going to go to Kingston, had been with you for a long while.
Yes, she was probably appealing, and sometimes they're with us for a long time when they're appealing.
All right, now, surely, however, the things must be improved in the Lakeside Centre because of the fact that this woman says here twice in the weeks before tried to kill herself.
Yes, that's quite often happens with inmates where they will have superficial slashes, and the doctor did determine that her slash was superficial.
This is the old cry for help.
Well, yes, I believe so. So in any event, we always have the doctor see them. The medical practitioner sees these people, and they make the determination whether or not they should be seen by a psychiatrist.
You're the custodian and the rehabilitator, is that right?
Well, so to speak.
So to speak. Now, there is a specific accusation against you that the officially appointed Citizens Advisory Committee be changed around to prevent being influenced by Ocala officials. Testimony indicated that Peacock's daughter was hired as secretary for the committee. Now, is that right?
Well, first of all, about the influencing the group, I think is highly insulting to the group to state that they cannot think for themselves that I influence them. And as far as my daughter, yes, there was a desperate situation by the board. They didn't have anyone to take minutes, and the chairperson of the board did hire my daughter, and she was a secretary for one session.
One meeting?
That's right.
And she didn't continue. Why didn't she continue?
Well, she would have been at the next meeting. However, the meeting was postponed, and subsequently this inquest, and she has since felt that she should not be there to impede the citizens'
to
board.
suggest that you, through your daughter, as
Yes.
secretary of the committee, are in any way influencing their work. Now, what does this Citizens Advisory Committee do? Does it come and inspect the prison and keep an eye on you and tell you what you're doing wrong?
The Citizens Advisory Committee has free access to the institution, to inmates in all parts of the physical plant. The purpose of the committee is to give a citizen's perspective on what should be happening in a prison.
And even so they can come anytime.
Yes, they can come anytime.
And go anywhere.
Yes.
And do they do that?
Infrequently.
Infrequently.
Yes.
But I mean, it's official government policy approved by the corrections branch that this activist group, and I've read some of the stuff, and obviously they're an activist group perhaps of good intentions, but they'll believe everything bad that's said about the prison at any time.
Well, the Citizens Advisory Board is a different committee than the activist committee.
I've mixed up the two
Yes,
together.
Yes.
The advisory board is, how is that picked?
A group of citizens, a cross-section of citizens from the community.
Approved by the government?
Approved by the committee members themselves. The original committee members were requested to start the board, and it was a recommendation of Madam Justice Proudfoot that we have a citizen committee. Then subsequently, each member is approved by the board members.
And have what do they tell you is wrong with Ocala now? Ocala Women's?
Well, they haven't offered any constructive criticism about what's happening there at the moment.
Yeah, now there is an activist group too.
Yes,
so
there is.
That's a different group altogether.
Yes, there is.
And they don't have free access to the prison.
No, they don't.
Would it be, and this was perhaps a brutal question, perhaps in your mind, this woman was alone in a unit?
Yes. No, she wasn't alone. She was alone in her own room, but she was not alone in the unit.
Alone in her own room. Could
Yes.
anybody else see her?
Not when she was in her room, except if they looked through the porthole.
Was she allowed out of the room from time to time?
Oh, yes, she had freedom to walk through the room.
Well, she wasn't locked in this one room. She could walk through that downstairs unit.
Yes, that's right.
Where did she have her meals?
There's a dining room there.
Downstairs?
Yes,
at
there is.
the foot of the stairs?
Across the hall from the day room. There's a day room, and then across the hall is a dining room.
Mm-hmm. What do you think could be done on a practical basis? As you say, if somebody's going to commit suicide, perhaps it's difficult not to, but she did leave a tragic note, didn't she?
Yes.
No one cares or wants to help me. Did she get any help at all?
Well, I think she did, because we had the medical people see her regularly, and I think she had probably more medical attention than most people that are in the institution. However, suicide is tragic at any time, whether it's in society or in a prison. But we do get a larger number of troubled people in a prison.
It does seem a shame, though, that somebody who's awaiting trial in a mental state, and there's no doubt about a mental state, in that mental state and can't get bail. I don't know why she couldn't get bail, whether it was lack of money or the judge decided not to let her out on bail. There are two ways that can go. Do you know?
No, I don't know.
But it seems a shame that she wasn't in Riverview instead of your place.
Well, that's true, but it's up to the psychiatrist to decide that.
Right. What would you like to see done to prevent not only the spotlight or any criticism that comes, but to prevent the possibility of a suicide in Ocala Women's Prison? If you had your way, what recommendations would you or have you made?
That's a difficult question, because we do need a lot of supervision on these very troubled people. There's no question about that.
A number of your people are troubled.
Yes, that's right. That's
you're
quite
55,
often.
you might have how many whom you would regard as marginally emotionally disturbed? All of them?
Well, most of them have troubles. That's why they're in prison.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they come to prison for that reason. Mind you, there may be some who come to prison who don't necessarily have to come to prison. There might be an alternative or a diversion which they could be participating in. But for the most part, the people who are sentenced to prison are as a result of a problem, and all we can do is give them the maximum supervision. I really don't know what I can say in addition.
Anyway, you give them, at the moment, the staff you have, the maximum supervision you have.
Yes.
I suppose the only way would be to have a hospital ward. You don't have a hospital ward where you can put these people.
No, we do not have a hospital
And of
ward.
course, you couldn't put them in the male hospital ward in Ocala, could you?
No. If we do get a new prison, which we're hoping to, we'll have a hospital ward there.
Marie Peacock, they've been talking about a new prison
Yes,
there
I know.
for 1,000 years. There isn't any
Yes.
sign of one, is there?
Well, I know we've been talking about it for 1,000 years, but hopefully.
Has it badly upset the morale of the other prisoners?
The other prisoners are always very upset initially when there's an incident of the impact that a suicide is. However, they are now just conducting themselves normally.
In a normal manner. So a regrettable business.
Yes, very much so.
Do you feel that you or your staff were in any way to blame for this?
No, I do not feel. I think the staff just did the best possible they could have done.
Yeah, too late, though.
Yes, unfortunately.
Fair enough, Marie. Can I come out in the fall and look at the prison again?
You certainly may.
Unexpected?
Unexpected.
Next one. I have a disassociated item on the program which is coming up next, but I want to ask a question. Not about the specific case, but related to it. When men get sentences, they are often sentenced to spend their time in jail at the weekends. Does the same happen to women?
Yes, oh yes. we
Okay,
have-
if I'm doing a sentence for whatever offence and I'm doing a weekend sentence at Ocala,
Yes.
and suppose I have to serve a day a week, what's the drill?
Well, the inmate or the person who's serving the sentence comes in voluntarily, and we have a special unit we keep these people in, and we do that for a specific purpose, and that is to avoid them having to succumb to the pressures of the other population to bring in contraband. So we do keep them in a separate unit. They come in either Friday night or Saturday morning, and they leave again on Sunday.
You don't let them mix with the other prisoners in case they get conned into bringing drugs.
Yes, that's right.
I mean, to put
That's
it
right.
bluntly.
Yes, that's right.
Drugs or whatever.
That's right. Most often these people are not jail-wise, so to speak, so it would be easy to pressure them.
And what do they do while they're in for their day or whatever? Nothing?
Not very much, no. We don't have any specific outlined program for them. They can do crafts or watch TV or...
No, but they're confined for the day to
Yes,
serve the sentence a
that's
day or
right.
2 days at a time.
That's right.
What time if I'm doing 3 days at the weekend, what time do I come in on a Friday?
That would depend on what the court has ordered you.
It's a court order.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, Marie, I'm going to pop in and see you in September.
Yes, please do, Jack.
My thanks to Marie Peacock, the director of Lakeside Correctional Centre, which is Ocala. Next, we're going to meet a woman who's doing 90 days in a most unusual manner. After the break. I have a letter, first of all, from a woman who is, and probably has been, and probably still is, committing welfare fraud. Some months I don't have enough money to feed my children. She gives the details of finances. Because of this, I have been forced to commit fraud. Instead of declaring my husband's back payments when they arrive in a lump sum, I declare the amount monthly, even when no payment has been made. I live in fear from one day to the next, and you can judge what this does to my emotional health. This woman is committing fraud. I don't have her name. I believe the letter to be true. That's a kind of introduction to this segment. The other day, one of the Welfare Coalition groups was saying that in today's society, some people are forced to commit fraud. The unlucky ones get charged, and the lucky ones don't get charged, and the lucky ones do get charged. As you know, we had a case on the air not so long ago where a woman told me bluntly she'd cheated $16,000 on fraud, and as far as I understand, the investigation has not yet been finished, and no charges have, to my knowledge, at this moment been leveled. This woman here, her name is Florence Kemp. How are you this morning, Florence?
Okay, thank you.
Don't be nervous. Don't be nervous. Is in trouble. And I don't want to put you through the ringer. In fact, I won't put you through the ringer, as you well know. But how much did you cheat Human Resources on?
$2,600.80 cents.
Between January the 1st, 1978 and February 28th, 1979.
Yes, and it works out to just a little over $200 a month over a 2-year period.
And you got caught?
Yes.
And you were charged with welfare fraud?
Yes.
Now, did you get legal aid?
Yes, I did.
How long did the trial take? Do you remember?
Several months.
No, but the actual trial took 7.5 days.
Oh, yes.
What sentence did you get?
Intermittent sentence, 90 days serving every Saturday for 11 hours for the next 90 days.
Next 90 weeks?
Well, it works out to almost 2 years.
Almost 2 years. And when did did your case go through the appeal court?
Yes, it did.
And you were denied legal aid for that, but
Yes.
the appeal was because the legal aid people obviously thought that the 90-day sentence served intermittently once a week over the 90-week period was not likely to be changed, so you didn't get legal aid for your appeal.
No.
When did you start serving your sentence? How long ago, roughly speaking?
Well, I did one day last month, and I started this past Saturday.
Tell me what you do.
Well, this Saturday I went into a little room, and I was in there for 10 minutes, and then I was given a pail and told to scrub the floor. And being a professional homemaker, that was no problem at all. Then a few minutes later, I was given another, lady opened the door and gave me wax to wax the floor. Then I just sat there until after supper. They took me into another room. It's like a lounge, fairly nice.
And watch the television?
Well, there wasn't any television there at the time, but they were going to put one in there. They had just finished redoing that unit.
What time in the morning did you get to Ocala?
8 o'clock.
How did you get there?
Cab, taxi.
Who paid the taxi?
I did, out of my food allowance.
How much did the taxi cost you?
It cost me $14 altogether.
How did you get home after supper?
A taxi.
You got no friends?
No, I don't want to impose on anybody at 8 o'clock in the morning, or 7 o'clock in the morning to get to Ocala.
Couldn't somebody from the police station downtown give you a lift out to Ocala?
I phoned my probation officer, I phoned Human Resources, and they said, no, I'm sorry, transportation is your responsibility.
Was there no other way you could go? I'm
No.
not being sensitive.
No, the bus doesn't go that far.
So here you are doing 90 days in jail, one day at a time, and you got to be there on a Saturday morning at what time?
8 o'clock.
I should have asked Marie if you could come later, but that's what the judge said.
That's what he said.
$28 to go to jail for a day.
No, it was $14 altogether.
Oh, $14
Yes,
altogether.
yes.
$7 each way.
That's right.
And then you come out at 6. What time did you? I'm hysterical. What time did you get out at night?
7 o'clock.
And back downtown again. Now, you were taking a BCIT course.
That's correct.
What for? What?
For upgrading level 3, which was grade 10, and then into a clerk typist program.
Now, you've had problems for a number of years, haven't you?
That's correct.
How long have you been, as we say nowadays, on your own?
9 years.
How many children do you have?
Just one.
Just one. How old is the child?
She's 10.
Is she at school?
No, she's not.
Where is she?
She's in the care of the Human Resources in a foster home.
When did she go into the care of the Human Resources?
The end of February.
After your sentence?
Yes.
Before you began to serve it?
That's correct.
Are you saying that after you got your sentence, Human Resources came and took your child?
No.
Or you asked them to
I
take
asked because my daughter completely mentally flipped right out. She made it clear that she loved me. She wanted to stay home. She cried. She says, Mommy, if you love me, why don't you let them take me? Because they have been after me a number of years. They threatened me on several occasions to take her away. For 9 years this has been going on.
Well, you've had problems. Maybe there was a time when maybe they should have taken her away to give her better care.
No, my daughter, no.
But look at all the money troubles you've had.
That's correct.
And you're doing the 90 days.
Yes.
Has anyone said to you you might not have to do the full 90 days for the next 87 weeks?
No. No, they made it perfectly
How much are you getting on welfare now?
$5.95. We just received a raise.
$595?
Yes.
That's for yourself and your daughter?
That's correct.
They'll cut that down with you. Oh, no, you...
No, my daughter's coming home. She's under very expensive care through a psychologist right now, through the taxpayers. They're trying everything to get her home.
Maybe she needed it, you know.
Well, I had no problems with her until we started going into court.
Well, yeah, she didn't know about this problem of all this
Yes,
fraud
she
charge,
did.
she?
She was right in the midst of everything, and all the harassment I've taken since I've started the course, she's been right there in the midst of it.
They were giving you a BCIT course. What's happened to that BCIT course now?
They cut me off my transportation allowance, and I've had to quit the course, and this month they put the $30 transportation allowance on, and they said if I was to go back to school, they would have to deduct $180 off my check, and I said, why? They said Manpower was going to put you back on the program, which I was cut off at the end of February, and they would give you that back. And I phoned Manpower, and the lady my worker was talking to, and the lady said, no, that's not true. I'm finished with Manpower. I'd have to take it out of my welfare. So if I go back to school, they take $180 off my check.
Where are you from originally?
Ontario,
How long have you been out here?
1966.
I wanted you on the program to demonstrate what I think seems to be, despite the fact that, you know, nobody can approve of cheating on welfare.
That's correct.
Even if you're to starve to death, they're not allowed to cheat on welfare in our society. But I can think of sentences given to other people, perhaps not in comparable circumstances, which don't put you through for 90 weeks. Should have been better to do a straight 30 days and be finished with it, wouldn't you?
Mentally, I don't think I could accept that.
You'd rather do a day at a time.
That's correct. It's easier.
Oh, maybe
on
I'm
this.
wrong. Maybe you're right.
Well, it's better this way.
I just wish they'd give you a bus fare. I used your name on the air, didn't I? Florence Kemp. You don't mind that?
No.
After the break. Florence, this has got to be true.
Yes, it is.
What you're going to tell me now?
Yes.
No nonsense.
No.
You were stuck for money when?
On the 16th of March?
So your lawyer phoned Human Resources and said you got to give it a food voucher.
No. The lawyer phoned Human Resources for a cab, which was to take me to a very important meeting that afternoon.
About your appeal?
About my daughter.
Okay, about your daughter.
Yes.
So tell me what happened.
Okay, the cab came to my home, picked me up, took me up to the Human Resources Department to pick up a $25 food voucher from the Human Resources Department. The cab took me to Burnaby on Hastings. I forget the exact address. And then from there, after we finished the meeting, I called a cab. He picked me up there, took me to Canada Safeway, waited a half an hour while I got my groceries and the food voucher, and then from Canada Safeway to my home. And it cost around $46.
The taxi did?
Yes.
But they cut off your bus allowance?
They cut off my bus allowance.
For $30?
That's correct.
Heather Strachan, Single Mothers United for Change. What do you do about this? I mean, she's got all kinds of problems. She did cheat on welfare. Somebody's got to be punished. I happen to think it's not the right kind of punishment, with all due respect to the judge, whoever he was. What do you suggest? You were the one that showed me the letter from a woman you know who says she's being forced to cheat on welfare.
That's right. And doing things like this to women who are basically innocent. They're not criminals. That's obvious. And there are lots of women out there forced into a position of fraud, just strictly to survive. They're paying up to 65% of their checks out just in shelter. And they just simply can't afford to put food on the table. When you're put in that position, you don't think of it as being a criminal act. You end up thinking of it as strictly survival. You must keep your children alive, yourself alive, and you've got to keep food in the stomachs of your children. Doing what they've done to Florence, I think, is criminal. I think that the courts were absolutely wrong. They have split this woman's family apart. They've destroyed her chances to go on in a lot of ways to lead a normal life. For the next 2 years, her whole life is going to be taken up.
Does it not depend on the individual? Look at yourself, for instance. You're obviously a single parent. Many kids?
I have 2 children.
You're not on welfare?
Yes, I am.
How much do you get?
I get a total of $610 a month.
Do you mind if I ask you a few personal questions?
No, go ahead.
How much rent do you pay?
I pay $350 plus utilities.
And that leaves you about $250 to live on.
At the most, depending on, I pay about $50 a month in heat and light.
How many women are in your organization?
We have a membership of about 25, but we have many people in contact with us that we help. We have a phone service that we advise people of their rights, and we go out and work as advocates for them.
How do you work as advocates? With the human resource people?
Yes. We go in as witnesses. We advise people what they're entitled to. We help them set up appeals and things like this to obtain what they need.
Appeals to the human resources?
Yes, the appeal tribunals.
There are appeal tribunals?
There are appeal tribunals, yes.
Now, if you find a woman who's cheating on welfare to survive, as you say, do you advise her to stop, or do you tell her to continue?
No, we do not condone fraud. We do not advise her to stop. Advising someone to stop when they're committing fraud is ridiculous if they're doing it to survive. All you're asking the lady to do is to starve. When you go into that ministry office and say, I can't feed my child, and they say, well, sorry, you're at the maximum, what is that lady going to do? The only thing we do advise them is that to get in touch with us if they're caught, and we will get them a lawyer.
Wouldn't they always give you a $25 food voucher and a $46 cab?
Those food vouchers are taken off your next month's check. It's up to the discretion
They're
of the
deducted.
worker. They're deducted off the next month's check.
But the workers, by and large, must be ordinary, decent people, surely to goodness.
There are a lot of good social workers out there. It's the system. It is totally the system.
Well, what do you suggest? Now, you see, a lot of old people out there are living on their old age pension and their guaranteed income supplement, and they'd never think of cheating, I don't think, most of them. Right?
I don't know. You got big businesses who are gleaming off a lot of money and
Oh, I
defrauding
know.
too.
All kinds of real estate rip-offs and stock frauds and whatnot. And if you steal $3 million, you'll only go to jail for 3 months and be out after a year and a day passed before that.
Look
you
at
know.
it this way, though. The poverty line for November 1980 was $9,422.
For how many people?
That is for a unit of 2. That's a mother and a child. Florence was getting, at that time, approximately $6,550. Now, even with her $2,000 in fraud, she did not come up to the government poverty line.
Is it the expectation of affluence is that people will no longer accept the fact that because they're on welfare, they must live at a lower standard without a color television set and without a car?
Well, I don't know. I don't have a color television set. I have an old black and white that you can't turn on and off, and I do not have a car. And I still, at times, cannot afford to clothe and feed my children.
Remember in the old days before Gracie brought in a new thing, there were always emergency grants.
There was special needs.
Special
that
needs
was under
grants.
NDP. Yes. Those are no longer around.
You now have a consolidated welfare allowance which includes a maximum for shelter if you pay the maximum.
That's right.
That's it. Now, how about yourself, though? Are you not on the retraining gimmick, the BCIT, the manpower?
No, I am
How many
not.
kids have you got?
I have 2. I have one who's 2 years old, and I have one who's 3.
So you're stuck at home.
That's right, until they are old enough to go into care. I also believe that motherhood is a full-time job, and that until the children are ready for that mother to leave the home, it's very important.
Well, you can make up to how much on the side? $100?
$100.
How do most people do that?
They try to do it. There are instances.
Babysitting.
Yeah, there are instances when women just can't, depending on their circumstances. If you've got 4 kids, it's pretty hard to take in 2 more to look after when you're doing it on a 24-hour-a-day basis. You know.
What do you suggest? What's your solution?
Well, I think an easement formula is the answer.
What's that?
An easement formula would be based on the number of children in the family and would allow you to earn X number of dollars over and above your welfare. And as you went up earning money, the government would take a cut off of it. And say if it was, the first $100 would be totally exempt, and the second $100 would be $75 exempt, and the third 100, so on and so forth.
So that you can climb up the scale gradually, getting your basic assistance from welfare.
And it could.
How old are you now, Florence?
I'm 32.
32. How old are you?
I'm 28.
What's your phone number if people want help from you?
437-1509.
437-1509. So let me think now. What's the date today?
It's the 31st.
31st March 1980. How many days have you done in jail?
2.
You've got 88 days to go. 88 weeks, 52, 2 and 8 is 6, 5 and 8 is 3, 36, 9 months. A year and 9 months from today, you'll be finished your chore. And it'll cost you 9 times $14, $15. No, 88 times 10 is 880. It's going to cost you $1,150 for cabs to get to Ocala. You gotta beat that. Somebody's got to come up with a system. Eh?
No, this is wrong. What they have done to her is wrong. Actually, Florence does not believe it, but in actual fact, he'd have been far kinder to have given her a 30-day sentence to be served immediately, because it is 2 years of her life. And by the end of those 2 years, it is going to be a strain. It's a strain on her family now.
Surely somebody has discretion to reduce it. But you went on a sentence appeal and you were refused.
That's right.
By judges of the appeal. Number? Your number?
437
437
1509.
Count your blessings, you men and women who are not yet single parents and have a cohesive family unit that can at least cope better financially than welfare, right?
That's right.
My thanks to you, Heather Strachan, and best of luck to you, Florence Kemp. Hope you get your daughter back soon. Hope you get your training. Hope you settle down. And I hope you never cheat on welfare again. After the break. Am I on the air? We have nothing new in the way of developments out of Washington, D.C. at the moment. As you know, Reagan's pulse, temperature, and everything else was perfectly normal this morning. Quite incredible. He mastered the secret of eternal youth, which is more than I have, especially when I'm faced with Maurice Levi and the changing economy and how you can, it says here, successfully cope. It should be how you can cope successfully. Slowth. And you're going to tell me just what causes inflation, how I can beat it, and what the cure is. I'm sure that you're full of witty and encouraging information about me. If I could find my notes on you, I'd be in better shape, but I can't find them.
Maybe you should use mine.
No, I'll use yours. Where do you earn your living, if any?
At the University of BC.
University of British Columbia?
A local.
God, if I'd been known from there, I wouldn't have taken you, because one tends to look at local universities and think not too highly of them. What's happening to our economy? Are we on a slippery path to shovelfuls and wheelbarrows full of money like Germany 1921?
Oh, no.
Why not?
Well, I mean, that's...
Inflation 12, 13, 14, 25% a year in Britain a little while back.
Well, but inflation in Germany during the hyperinflation was at a rate where prices were doubling every month or even every week.
Just like Israel, until they devalued the currency recently.
130% inflation.
130%.
Yeah, we've got a long way to go yet.
Yeah, but will we continue to go through this slippery upward climb in inflation until finally the money's worth nothing and they revalue the dollar?
Well, it could happen, but it's not something that we can anticipate necessarily at the moment, and that's not really what ultimately matters. Let me just, you mention Israel. Israel has a standard of living that's growing relatively rapidly. In fact, during the 70s, it was one of the fastest growing countries in the world in terms of the standard of living of the people.
Right.
And that should just serve as an example of the difference between our standard of living and the rate of inflation. The rate of inflation is just a question of numbers. You know, we can have everything go up by 100-fold if we measure everything in terms of pennies, you know, your salary, the price of butter, and so on. But what really matters ultimately is the number of pounds of butter and the number of new cars and new houses and haircuts and television sets that are manufactured. That's the standard of living.
You're back to the old productivity gobbledygook.
That's the key. That's more troublesome than the rate of inflation.
Well, you are an associate professor of finance at the University of British Columbia, and perhaps you're not in touch in the sheltered, tenured halls of UBC, where I don't think anybody really works terribly hard.
Oh, I think they work very hard.
Yeah, but you know what I mean in terms of production. Is there not an attitude in the Western world today where one must get the maximum possible for doing as little as possible?
Well, that's the problem, and let me explain the background to Slowth, and you'll see why this is in fact a serious problem. Slowth is slow economic growth, and it's the frustration that we're all having in having an improvement in our standard of living. Now, it's the nation as a whole that's having slow growth, and of course we're all part of that. And the nation's having slow growth in the standard of living for some very fundamental reasons, and that is that the supplies of inputs into the nation aren't growing very fast.
What's the supply of inputs?
Well, let me explain. You can think of the economy, if you like, as a giant sausage machine.
Good.
And into one end you put raw materials, and people turn the handles of the machine, and they have a certain number of machines.
And out come the widgets.
Out come the widgets at the other end. And the question is, well, what's happening to the widgets at the other end if we decide, through a genuine concern for the environment and environmental consciousness, not to cut as many trees, or not to increase the number of trees that we've been cutting, or not to extract more barrels of oil, or to strip mine more mountains? And if we're going to put a slower growth, at least, in terms of these raw materials, it's not going to come out at the other end. Similarly, if we have slower growth in the effort to turn the handles on these machines, less is going to come out at the other end, or less machines, or slower improvement in the technology of these machines.
Do I get you correctly, Dr. Levy, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Do I get you correctly that this slowth is bad?
Well, it's bad. Let me tell you why it's bad. It's not bad in that Canada has a very high standard of living currently, and so we can, in a sense, afford to stay where we are. And Slowth isn't saying we're going to go into some terrible slide. It's just that we're not going to make progress very rapidly. It's bad because people have become to accept progress as the norm. Now, what we've done, and I'll go back to these inputs, is we've put barriers onto those inputs. Environmental consciousness is slowing the rate at which we put the raw materials through. Our humane consciousness for individuals is slowing the rate that we put effort into work. Our safety consciousness is constraining the growth of the new technologies. You know, we can have more electricity if we just wanted to take the chance, but we don't want to take the chance, and perhaps rightly so. And finally, we regulate to protect our safety and our environment, and that's cutting business investment.
Give me that again. Environmental consciousness, regulations, safety factors, and being decent to people instead of working children in mines at 9 years of age.
That will cut the inputs, or at least the growth of them, and that'll cut the standard of living.
But what does he recommend about this Slowth? That's the important thing for Maurice Levi. Good title for the book, too. Slowth, after the break. Maurice Levi is surprisingly interesting for an associate professor of finance at UBC. That's a compliment, it's not a snide remark. You're telling me why we have Slowth now, and we can all see it, we all know about it, and I'll throw in trade unions, bad management, regulation, environmental restrictions, human consciousness, being decent to people, and safety factors. Now, should we accept the Slowth as outlined in your book, or should we fight Slowth?
Well, I think that we have to accept it, but unfortunately I don't think that people during the 50s and 60s, when they built up expectations of progress and being able to have holidays in Europe and you know, second cars and color television sets, are ready to accept it. You know,
but what do you want?
I want to keep a good society, so I'm prepared to accept a relatively slow growth in the standard of living, but look what happens here. You've got those people who currently sense that their standard of living isn't high enough. And everybody wants more. You know, it's natural to dream to have more.
Webster's theory, based on McLuhan, of course, that the medium is the message and that the expectations of affluence cannot be denied to anyone on the face of this earth.
Well, I think that a lot of people believe that. Now, if that's true, and you accept the premise that the slow growth in our standard of living is something that's constrained by these physical inputs and by the number of machines, then what are you going to do?
Look at the case just now where I am putting one of the squarest Calvinistic John Knoxian people you have ever met in your life, being nice to people who cheat on welfare. 10 years ago I'd have said, the back of my hand, do your time in jail.
Well, you know, there are very genuine, needy people in this world, and those that who are more affluent have to bear the price. You know, it's, let me say this, that Slowth is only bad because people won't accept it. You know, I'm not saying that people are going to get poorer.
You want me to cut my standard of living?
No, no, I just want you to accept that it's not going to grow at the rate that you got used to during the 1960s. It was pretty static during the 70s, but everybody seems to think that they can get ahead, and somebody must be at fault for their standard of living not moving up. Management, the government, the Arabs, the unions, the welfare bums, whatever it is. And so we're all looking at somebody to blame. The truth of the matter is that we've collectively elected officials that show concern for the environment, that can show concern for our safety over some technological disaster, that show concern over other human beings. Here you are defending the other human beings, and rightly so. But you have to accept that that's going to have a bite on our output and our standard of living.
Hopefully an intelligent question. Has this Slowth has come about because of the financial policies of the Western world?
No, I see that's again looking for a particular fault.
Right.
No, it's the result of everybody collectively showing concern for the environment, trying to show concern for their fellow man.
What is your message then to people, having analysed Slowth and the changing economy? Are you preaching that we must accept this?
Well, I'm preaching that, let me take a couple of lines on this. The government must accept it, because economic policy that's been tuned to expecting 5 or 4% real growth in our standard of living every year will have to accept that maybe it's only going to grow at 1% because we're doing lots of other things with our society, at least in terms of the conventional measure of it, you know, that gross national product.
Yeah.
So we can't, if we try to achieve 5% but we can only achieve 2%, and we use demand management to do it, monetary policy and fiscal policy, we're going to cause inflation.
But are you not concerned with the ghastly featherbedding and bureaucracy and waste of effort in unproductive areas?
Well, you know, that's, if we could find them, if it's a straightforward solution, a quick fix, well, then maybe we can get more. But, you know, that's looking again, that says the government's at fault.
But is Slowth not good for employment? Slowth is good for employment.
Well, it doesn't necessarily have any bearing on unemployment or
I'm
the rate
just
of
thinking,
employment.
for instance, we have, believe it or not, a $2 billion healthcare budget out of $6 billion in British Columbia. It's almost an unthinkable figure, even though the services are needed. But I suspect that 25% of it is feather-bedded waste.
Well, I mean, you know, you'd have, I don't know the numbers specifically on that. I suspect that there's a lot of fat in government, and that's what everybody seems to think. That's, you know, that's the view that's been taken in the United States, that the government has to trim itself, and hence the spending cuts and the tax cuts, which collectively mean just scaling down government. That's currently the scapegoat. Look what we've gone through in the early 70s and the mid-70s. It was all the Arabs that were causing our standard of living not to grow. If you go back to the 60s, the radical 60s, it was always big business. Remember how we always jumped on big business? There's been times when it's been unions, welfare bums, you name it. But, you know, if you accept that we have chosen to preserve the environment for ourselves and for later generations and to take care of people and to not build nuclear power plants in our backyard, then you have to accept that we collectively are at fault, not any particular group. The problem is that if you don't have a growth in the standard of living, you're going to try and identify a scapegoat.
Slowth, therefore, your financial analysis of the economy and whatnot, is good for us.
Oh, I'm not saying it's good for us. I'd rather not have Slowth, but I'm saying that...
You'd rather have growth?
Oh, sure I would, but I'd rather have growth if we could have it without a price. There is a price. The United States will have growth, but it's going to have to cut back on welfare, it's going to have to cut back on environmental concern, and there will be a price. Problem is, a lot of people don't think there will.
Oh, they'll have unemployment.
Well, that's different. They'll have perhaps unemployment because of different types of demand management policies.
We wouldn't dare have unemployment in this country with the kind of wimpy governments we have in Victoria and everywhere across the country and Ottawa. Well, we must be populist, except on patriating the Constitution. Is that not right?
Well, you know...
Look, I promise you now, I'm plead guilty not having read it. I will read it. Terrific. I like it. Maurice Levi, Associate Professor of Finance at the University of British Columbia, an excellent university. It is.
It is.
I insist. Slowth. And I'll be back with the latest bulletins on El Presidente et al. After the break. It's still the biggest story in the world and will be for some time, barring any other attempts. Bring you up to date right now on the Reagan situation. First we go to the medical press conference.
Had an excellent night. The endotracheal tube, which was placed in his surgery, was removed at 3 o'clock this morning, and he was moved from the recovery room to a private area at about 5 o'clock this morning. He did not get a lot of sleep last night. It was a busy night. He maintained a constant dialogue with the nurses and doctors who were in constant attendance with him, maintaining an excellent sense of humor. I'm sure you'll hear many of his remarks. My favorite one is he said, if I'd gotten this much attention on Hollywood, I never would have left. But this went on all night. I had an opportunity to see him this morning. He is in excellent spirits. All of his vital signs are entirely normal. He's on almost no medication. And at this point in time, he really probably does not require an intensive level of medical care. He's doing extremely well. Mr. McCarthy is also doing extremely well, and he is complaining a little bit of soreness in the liver area, which is a little bit understandable. He has a mild elevation of his temperature and of his white blood count, which would be expected after a liver injury, but he otherwise is doing extremely well. Mr. Brady is much improved over his initial prognosis. He still has his endotracheal tube in. However, he is responsive and is moving the right side of his body in response to command. As anticipated, his tube will be removed later today. We are guarded as to his prognosis, but his progress thus far has really been extraordinary.
Are you suggesting that Mr. Brady understands your directives or questions to him and responds to them?
Yes.
Dr. O'Leary, I take it then that the prognosis for the President's complete recovery is excellent and you expect it?
That is correct.
How soon would you expect that, Dr. O'Leary?
How soon for his
Recovery.
complete recovery?
Hospital recovery first, and then his complete recovery.
Okay. Hospital course is, does vary by patients, probably in the range of a week or two, but that'll depend upon his specific course, and then after that, probably a couple of months until he is totally back to riding horses.
Dr. O'Leary, has the president been using the telephone? Has he been in contact with the White House?
Well, there've been a number of people from the White House in to see the president. This morning he is, as I say, fully alert, joking back and forth. I don't believe so.
How soon do you think the president would carry out a full-time day?
Well, the question was, how soon can the president put in a full-time day? That's a little bit speculative. He's obviously able to function right now, and in terms of his thought process, capacity to make decisions and so forth, he can probably put in a full-time day-to-day as long as he gets a nap this afternoon.
What are the chances for post-operative complications such as pneumonia or atelectasis?
At this point in time, I would be very surprised to see such complications developed. He is doing as well as any patient who has had an operation on his chest could do.
Does he have much pain? Has the president at all asked, or has he been told about the condition of his press secretary?
He is not aware of the number of the other people who were shot and injured at this time.
Has he asked at all about them?
He did not ask in my presence. I can't say whether he's asked anyone else, but he is not aware of it as of this morning. Yes.
Doctor, did you say that the president talking so much and joking so much, is this normal, or is he on some kind of high, or why is he talking?
I don't think he's on any high, and I don't think we put him there on the basis of any of his drugs. He's a very outgoing, very vital person. From what I've seen of him, this is quite in character.
Does the president have much pain? What is his comfort level?
The president is requiring almost no pain medication at all. He is, tough in a good sense.
Doctor, is there any indication at this point the extent of any brain damage that Jim Brady might have suffered?
Well, the bullet, entered just lateral to his left eye and really traversed across to the right posterior skull where it stopped and it was removed. There was fairly extensive damage of the right hemisphere of the brain. However, that is his non-dominant side, and the important area that controls not only his motor movement on his right side, but all of his speech and mental processes are on the left side. There was some minimal amount of damage involving the left side of the brain. In patients like this, the spectrum of possible outcomes is very, very wide, and it would be really highly speculative right now to guess at what will happen to him.
Dr. O'Leary, it does seem rather strange that you have not told, just a moment, it does seem rather strange that you have not told the president of the condition of his own press secretary. Is that a medical decision? Are you concerned about that? Are you concerned over Mr. Reagan's reaction?
No, I think you have to remember the president has been through a little bit of an experience himself, and our general experience is that we don't force-feed information to people. Rather, we respond when they feel ready to deal with an answer by asking a question.
Can you tell us more about Brady's response? Is it too light? Is it the pinpricks? Is he semi-conscious? Has he shown any sign of semi-consciousness?
Well, yeah, I think his level of consciousness is reflected by virtue of his responsiveness. He is asked to move his right arm, he moves it. He's asked to move his right leg, he moves it. He is clearly receptive to command. He's obviously not able to talk or reflect other levels of alertness until his endotracheal tube comes in. His eyes are open and his pupils are small and reactive to light. Very good sign.
All the fragments of the bullet been removed from Brady's brain?
We believe so. I mean, the whole bullet was removed intact.
Doctor, you said he could move his right leg and his right arm. Is he able to move his left leg and his left arm? Is there any paralysis that has appeared?
Well, again, we will not be able to assess that until we get a little bit further downstream. The left side of the body is dominantly controlled by the right side of the brain, and so we're not surprised that if he's going to have a level of impairment, it would probably affect the left side of the body. We believe that he's going to live. We are cautiously optimistic, but we have no idea where he's going to end up.
Kind of sad. Next, Larry Speaks, who the Deputy Press Secretary, will fill us in on what you might call a tactical situation in relation to the Presidente.
This morning, Jim Baker, the White House Chief of Staff, and Ed Meese, the Counselor to the President, and Mike Deaver, the Assistant to the President, met at the hospital for breakfast together. They visited the President for about 10 to 12 minutes, around 7:15. As they went in, the President was sitting up. He was brushing his teeth. They have presented him with a dairy bill, which you have there, an actual copy of what he signed. As you know, the dairy price support bill had to be signed today in order to be effective on the April 1st date. A couple of additional quotes. These are written quotes. He sent out a Winston Churchill quote, which said, Winston Churchill said, "There is no more exhilarating feeling than being shot without result." Then the quote that Dr. O'Leary gave you, which is a written quote. The first one is at midnight. This one is at 2:05 a.m. If I had this much attention in Hollywood, I'd never left. Then to a nurse, a spoken something he said after the tubes had been removed at 3 a.m. I always heal fast. The nurse said, "Keep up the good work." The President said, "You mean this may happen several more times?"
Can you tell us what arrangement has been worked out to bring matters to the President's attention? What division of authority and what division of work has been worked out among the senior staff and the President?
Basically, there's no division of authority. The President remains the President, of course. The senior staff, the top 3 senior staff members have met with him this morning. I anticipate that the Vice President will be going out to visit the President today. The Vice President attended the senior staff this morning, and his statement there was that we will continue business as usual, that I will sit in on the meetings that the President would have normally attended, and will act as if he were here.
Will the Vice President have decision-making power?
I'm sure the President will make all the decisions, as he always has.
So if the decision has to be made at these meetings, it'll be by reference to a call to the hospital?
Well, I don't know the mechanism, but I can assure you that whatever decisions are required, the President will make them, and he'll certainly be consulting with the Vice President, and they will meet today.
Will the Secretary of State be in the Situation Room all day today, do you know?
I don't know the Secretary of State's schedule.
Will that crisis management group or the same group or something like that be in the Situation Room?
I don't know that they will assemble today.
Larry, has the President been advised of Secretary Haig's efforts at crisis management yesterday?
I don't know that's been transmitted to the President.
The Noon News, Jim Hart and the BCTV News Hour will keep you up to date on the American crisis, and any news bulletins you should see, you'll see. Bad news for Prime Minister Trudeau, he'll ignore it. The Newfoundland Supreme Court has upheld the provinces. They're right and he's wrong on the Constitution. Quick.
Brian Ralph from Legal Aid and David Cadman from VMREU talking about the strike.
City Hall boys, etc. 9 a.m. precisely. How'd you like to do a day at a time? 90 days, 90 weekends in jail.